The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Warren Ingram, good evening.
Good evening, Stephen.
Sorry about that. Okay, so you're an entrepreneur and you're so used to managing your money for your business. You live, breathe, eat, sleep your business, but you really shouldn't be doing that with your money. How do you sort of navigate that tension?
I think we should probably break it up into different stages of the business's life. When you do financial planning, it's very natural to plan according to your own life stages as a human being, and I think it's there are big parallels with the company. So to me, the first stage, and I'm sure the entrepreneurial academics would have fancy names for these things, but I just want to call it the survival stage, and or survival phase, and that's when you've just got started and you're doing everything you possibly can to get your business going and keep it afloat, and potentially going from day to day or week to week, month to month. And there is going to be no money. There's going to be no extra money to pay yourself for. Probably not even to pay yourself a decent salary. Forget about drawing dividends and paying out profits and all of those things. So I think in that phase, the only thing I would say is you want to make sure that your personal finances are as simple and as stress-free as possible. And that really means make sure you don't have debt. So you don't really want to be suffering under the load of a credit card or personal loan, overdraft, etc., and trying to keep your business going. So if you're not able to look after yourself financially in terms of saving for your long term and saving for the future, that's okay at this stage of the business's life. But you really don't want to be making short-term business decisions because you've got bills to pay on your credit card at the end of the month. That could lead to bad personal finance decisions, but also very bad business decisions. So no rocket science on survival phase. It's just keep it simple, keep yourself debt-free, and give yourself kind of breathing room financially just to get the business going, and hope that you get past the survival stage to the better days.
The thing about the survival phase is, in a way, strangely, it might actually be one of the more simple phases because you're just starting. So there is so much to do, but you hope and pray that it doesn't last forever. And once you start to establish yourself, the dynamics around it all start to really change.
Yeah, then it's the equivalent of becoming adulting for the first time in your business's life, and the first thing you've got to do, and it's quite difficult for entrepreneurs to do this. I mean, I know from experience when we started our company, but you have to start paying yourself a market-related salary. And it seems like such a strange thing to do because you might be the only owner of your business, but there's someone saying to you, pay yourself a salary. But it's important because you don't really have a viable business if you're not drawing a proper salary for yourself. If the business can't afford to pay you, and I'm not saying an extravagant amount of money, but just what you would earn for this kind of a role in another operation, then you're not at the establishment phase. So kind of after survival, you get to this establishment phase, and the real test here is, can you pay yourself a salary? If you can, and it's market related, then it's time to kind of clean up all the things that you might have let slip while you were in that survival phase. In other words, make sure that you've got a proper medical aid, make sure that you've done your life assurance calculations so that your loved ones are okay if something happens to you. Surprise, surprise, I'm going to tell you to build up your emergency fund again. If you used your whole emergency fund to look after the business, now is the time to get that going for yourself. And then maybe the last point on this stage is start doing a retirement fund contribution. And if you can't do 15% of your salary at this stage, that's okay. But just start something, even if it's 5% a year. And my logic here is you need to start treating yourself as a valuable asset to the company, but also that you're trying to build up and maybe rebuild a little bit of your personal finances that are entirely separate from the business. We always need to plan for things to go well in the company, but equally you need to plan just in case things don't go well in the business. And that's why you start to pay yourself the salary and get your personal finances back on track again.
I've often thought a little bit about the idea of the market-related salary. It must be quite hard to know what that is. I realize you can do some research and you can look at adverts and things, but if you're the owner of the business, it's personal, and the business, I mean, it's many things, but it's also for you. So to come to the right amounts, the market-related salary, I mean, should you ask someone else to do that for you, maybe?
I find there maybe a few ways. One very nice asset test for you as a business owner is if you, I mean, you're the business owner, which means that you do anything and everything to keep the business afloat. But there will be the core job, the thing the reason you started the company. And if you were to hire somebody to do that core job, so not to be the chief cook and bottle washer and all the other things that you have to do as the entrepreneur, but the actual core job of whatever it is that you do in your business, then it's understanding what salary would you pay that person to do that job. And you might have come out of a very senior position, doing the job yourself before you became the entrepreneur. And it's maybe not necessary that you would pay yourself the senior person's salary, but just to kind of do that replacement. And then I think you can look around and you can ask someone for help, but equally nowadays, a lot of these, these kind of jobs are available, or the data around these jobs, and especially the salaries, are available online. So you can find salary surveys and the like. But if you can't get any data, then certainly maybe pick up the phone to a recruitment agent or two and ask them what these jobs are paying. But I find they all advertise, and often they give you salary bands. So certainly when you're small as a business, you can't really afford to pay a lot of people for a lot of additional data from the outside. So use what's free and use the internet to help you with this.
I mean, the other thing is, and I'm sure I can just imagine the debates that you would have internally, is how do you know you're no longer in survival, but you're now in established stage? And I think a lot of small business owners don't actually sleep very well for quite a long time when they start their business.
I think that's a very true statement, and it seems to be this sort of anecdotal thing of 1,000 days, and to me, that's roughly 3 years, but probably somewhere around 3 to 5 years before you start to feel that you are past survival, and I think it's when you know that you can go to sleep at the end of at month end, and know that when you wake up next month, the bills are going to be paid, that you're not just scrambling to make ends meet every week or every month, and also that you're starting to think about extra money that's coming into the company, and you're starting to try and think about, where do I allocate the money to grow my business in the right direction? So it's not just I have to pay the bills to pay the rent and to pay the few staff I've got. Now you're starting to say, should I take on more premises? Should I buy another machine? Should I start advertising? All of those are growth decisions, but they're not survival decisions. So it's a very good sign that you're moving in the right direction, but you're thinking about how to allocate money best, and then I'm probably landing at this established phase now and past the survival phase.
It's such an interesting conversation to have about how do you know at which point you are when you're running your business. I mean, it's not an easy thing. Okay, so we move from the kind of established phase, and after that you get to the mature phase. So the business is, I suppose, running itself a little bit. What do you need to do then?
This is, if you had to draw a parallel, this would be the equivalent of someone in their career at somewhere around the age of 50, between 50 to 65. So you've done a lot of the school fees. You know what you're doing. You've paid. You've had all the valuable lessons you need. You're still learning and you're still growing, but you are in a stage where you can kind of stop and smell the roses a little bit and do a little bit of planning. And I find for entrepreneurs at this stage, they start to look at their business a little bit differently, because in the early days, in that survival and establishment phase, it's all about just getting the thing going and keeping it afloat and then making it grow. But when you get to the stage where your business is a bit more mature, it becomes a double-edged sword, because most likely it's your biggest asset. It's the thing that you are going to have to sell or do some kind of a financial transaction so that you can draw some money out of the company, that when you no longer work in the business, you're able to live a good life, in retirement. And so you look at your business and you say, great, it's my biggest asset. But equally, that means it's also my biggest risk, because I've put all this effort and all this time into it, and I haven't drawn, lots of money out of the business and paid myself, big bonuses, etc., to get the business going. So if it fails now, before I've had a chance to do a whole lot of investing and saving outside of the company, I could be in real financial difficulty. So you start to look at your business quite differently, and it's probably a very good stage to look at saying, what can I do to build up assets far removed from my company? And that means you start to have conversations with the accountants where they tell you about things like dividends tax, and then you're going to be really upset that you're paying extra tax to take money out of your company. But when you're at that stage, you're finding good ways and the most efficient ways to start paying yourself, maybe extra money over and above the market-related salary, so that you can protect and insulate yourself from the business in the event that something goes wrong. And so it's not a case of trying to allocate money to something that will grow faster than your business. Most likely, if you've got a successful company, it's the fastest growing asset that you have. What you're doing is you're looking at this and saying, how can I manage risk? How can I de-risk my overall financial plan? So it's almost, I'd call it your banker money. So you're trying to put money in global markets, or if you're whatever your business is, you're investing in things that move in a very different way from your company, so that if something goes wrong, your investment assets are not as affected as your business assets. And so this is risk management, de-risking, proper adulting, and financial planning. And your aim here is not necessarily additional wealth creation, but it's certainly to try and buy yourself some peace of mind and get that sleep at night factor now that your business is in the flow.
Obviously, as an exit stage, we're going to come to that in just a moment. We have a question from Ntaba Singh for you, Warren, saying, hi, my employer just offered me a salary increase of 3.1%. He says that's slightly higher than inflation, but my expenses are growing so quickly. Is this increase fair? Ntaba saying it's a great question. I mean, what was it? Appliance inflation is negative 5% or something if you're buying an air fryer. But your food inflation is much higher than that. Your medical aid inflation is way above inflation. So Ntaba saying, I think your question is such a good one. We'll get an answer from Warren in just a moment. 9 minutes to 8.
The Money Show. Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Talking, of course, about your personal finances as an entrepreneur. But before we get back to that, Warren, Ntaba Singh's question, my employer's offered me a 3.1 salary increase. He says that's slightly higher than inflation, but my expenses are growing so quickly. Is this increase fair? And Warren, I suppose your answer may lie in whether you're Ntaba Singh or her boss.
It's such a tricky situation. I think, we maybe just need to explain a little bit about CPI, because, this number gets calculated by the Stats SA people, so there are a bunch of very clever economists that put together this measure of how the cost of things is moving from one year to the next, and they do it month to month, and everyone says it's probably manufactured, and probably a lie, etc. And they get all upset with it because they look at their own cost of living and it doesn't reflect what's shown in these official numbers. And I think just to understand that CPI number, or that inflation number, it's the most average basket of goods for the most average South African there is. And unfortunately, that person doesn't really exist. So each of us spends our money in a bit of a different way from everybody else. And depending on the income that we earn and the assets that we have, our expenses might be hugely impacted by the price of fuel, for example, because for some people, and a lot of people in our country, would spend a huge proportion of their salaries on transport. But if you're retired and you don't spend much on transport, you might be much more affected by medical inflation, or all of us would be affected by food inflation. So I think just understanding that, that number, whatever it is, I see, in June it was 3%, and then it was 3.8 and now it's come down, and it will move from month to month. So is your employer doing you in? I don't think so. I think if these were calculated at the time and they used the most recent CPI number and they do that at the same month every year, then they're not trying to manipulate the game. But if you're measuring your cost of living and let's say medical aid is your biggest cost, and you say, well, hang on, that's somewhere between 6.8 to 8.5%. I'm actually going backwards. I get the argument. I mean, I think it's a fair point to Ntabi saying, but very difficult for employers to increase salaries at let's say 8 or 10% a year, when potentially their own costs on everything else are also going up, and so you could end up giving what you think as an employer, you give your staff a fair increase, but you give your staff these increases for a few years and you run out of business. You don't make profit, and eventually you make losses and you go south. So I'm sitting on the fence, Stephen, because I think it's such a phenomenally difficult issue, and the only number we've all got is the CPI number, and I think it's perfectly incorrect, but it's probably the best thing we've got as a country.
Okay, let's just return to the entrepreneur. It's a great answer you've given, Warren, because it's very difficult. Let's just return to the entrepreneur and your personal finances. At some point, you need to exit the business. You're hoping things have gone well, that it's sustainable. You do need to sort of manage your finances at that point too.
You do, and I think it's just understanding that you might plan to run this business until your last day, and that's fine. But it's still, something needs to happen to the company when you're not around. So you might decide to retire from the business, or you might decide to sell it, or you might be hoping that someone will take over. One of your family would take over from you. In all of those, there will be a transition. There'll be a transition of management. There'll be a transition of ownership, and it's your job as the entrepreneur to get the business ready for sale. Even if you're not planning to sell it, you need to know that there is going to be a change of ownership.
I think we are going to leave things there as it stands. Let me just make a couple of points just to sort of sum up what Warren was talking about. And it seems to me that one of the hardest things to know is at what stage your business is at. And that, I think, is going to be the issue. Anyway, all right. So Warren Ingram was just wrapping up that conversation. It seems to me the hardest thing to know about all of this is really, how do you identify the stage of the business that you're at? And that maybe, I think, for all entrepreneurs must be the most difficult thing. And we've come across this, many times. We've spoken about it in other features too around small businesses. It's such an interesting question, though, for me, about how you keep your money separate and the idea of a market-related salary that you sort of pay yourself. I mean, I've known, obviously, for years and years that that's the way it has to be done. But I've always been very interested in the mechanics of how you decide that. And I think that's probably not that easy a thing to do. How do you decide what the sort of market-related salary is when it includes you? You're the person who's going to get it. Going to be very, very difficult.